The tablet screen pulsed with the final merger document. Julian hovered over the device, his finger poised to confirm. Then a sharp digital chime cut through the silence of the office. A bold red stamp slammed across the screen. Fraud detected. The letters burned against the white background. Julian froze. The color drained from his face as the screen flickered, locking him out of the company portal. He turned, but the office door had already been pushed wide. The heavy, rhythmic thud of boots hit the marble floor. Federal agents moved in formation, their pace measured and unavoidable. They crossed the expansive room, the sound of their movement echoing against the glass partitions. Julian backed away, his heels catching on the edge of the thick area rug. He reached for the tablet, but an agent stepped into his path, blocking the exit. The high-rise windows reflected the city skyline, a world that was moving on without him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of metal against metal drowned him out. The agents closed the distance. His reign ended not with a bang, but with the cold, precise snap of handcuffs locking around his wrists. The sterile silence of the office dissolved, replaced by the low hum of a distant engine. 25 years earlier, the world was much smaller. It fit inside a single detached garage on the edge of the city. The concrete floor was stained with decades of oil, and the air held the permanent scent of gasolisol and heavy metal. George stood by the open bay door, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. Behind him sat their first asset, a delivery truck with rusted wheel wells and a persistent rattle in the transmission. Mila watched him from the workbench, checking a ledger filled with handwritten notes. They had no investors, no office staff, and no backup plan. Just a commitment to keep the wheels turning. Every delivery was a test of endurance. George spent his mornings navigating the city streets, learning every shortcut and every potential delay. Mila managed the logistics from a corner desk made of plywood, ensuring that every cent earned went back into the fuel tank or the maintenance of the engine. They worked until the sun dipped below the horizon, their faces smudged with soot and their muscles aching from the strain. It was a slow, grueling climb, but they built the foundation 1 mile at a time. The garage became a classroom. Leslie, Robert, and Angela grew up with the scent of motor oil in their hair and the rhythm of the delivery schedule as their heartbeat. George often sat them down on stacked shipping crates after a long shift, his calloused hands resting on the workbench. He would pull out the day's delivery logs, showing them the thin margins and the temptation of cutting corners. Mila stood by the whiteboard, marking the routes, emphasizing that a business was only as strong as its promises. One evening, Robert pointed to a route that saved 3 hours but bypassed a safety check. George shook his head, tapped the logbook, and pointed toward the truck. He explained that a shortcut today would become a liability tomorrow. They drilled the children in the necessity of fair wages, even when money was scarce, and the importance of choosing sustainable materials over the cheapest alternative. The children watched their parents refuse lucrative, unethical contracts, choosing instead to sustain the firm on reputation alone. They learned to listen to the engine's health and the client's needs with equal focus. In that garage, they witnessed that success was not a sprint to be won, but a slow, steady climb built on the weight of every honest decision. They were learning the architecture of a legacy that no market shift could dismantle. Years passed, and the garage floor gave way to the hum of a bustling logistics terminal. Leslie stepped into the role of client relations. Her office a constant rotation of headset calls and contract negotiations. She mastered the art of the deal, turning every frustrated inquiry into a long-term partnership with a calm, precise voice. Robert took over the fleet, spending his hours in the maintenance bay. He could identify a failing fuel pump by the vibration through the steering column, ensuring every vehicle remained in peak condition. He kept the trucks on the road through sheer mechanical discipline. Angela claimed the digital domain, building a custom tracking system that gave clients real-time visibility. She sat before 4 glowing monitors, her fingers tracing code through the night to optimize route efficiency. When the company expanded to regional hubs, the siblings moved in lockstep. Leslie secured the contracts, Robert managed the hardware, and Angela refined the software that tied it all together. They stopped merely operating a business and started commanding an industry. The atmosphere shifted from survival to expansion. They were no longer just children of the founders. They were the architects of a new, aggressive growth phase. Each success reinforced the others, creating a synchronized power that propelled the firm forward, turning their parents' steady climb into a calculated, rapid ascent. The office rhythm was a precise clockwork until the day the front door swung open and stayed it open. Julian walked in, carrying a leather briefcase that looked too heavy for his slight frame. He moved through the terminal with an unhurried, sliding gait that drew the eyes of the staff. Leslie stopped mid-call, her pen hovering over a ledger. Robert stood up from his workbench, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, his gaze lingering on the newcomer. Julian navigated to the center of the floor, his presence acting like a sudden drop in pressure. He smiled, but the movement did not reach his eyes. He spoke of family, of debt, and of a desire to contribute to the company's rising trajectory. George and Mila stepped out from their private office, their expressions guarded. They exchanged a brief, silent look, a shared instinct that the air in the room had grown thin. Julian stepped forward, offering a firm, lingering handshake to each sibling. The terminal seemed to quiet as he began to talk, his voice smooth and calculated. He stood in the middle of their hard-earned success, a shadow cast across the pristine floor. The siblings returned to their work, but the focus had fractured. The confidence that had defined their growth now faced a quiet, persistent unease. Julian wasted no time installing himself in a corner office with a clear view of the entire floor. He presented himself as the financial advisor the company needed to manage its rapid scaling. He spent his mornings reviewing ledgers and his afternoons in private meetings with bank representatives. He carried stacks of paper, constantly requesting access to the digital archives that Angela had built. She granted him the credentials, trusting the family bond that George and Mila insisted upon. While Leslie negotiated new regional shipping routes, Julian sat behind his closed door, his fingers moving across his private laptop. He utilized the company's internal network to mask his movements, routing capital through a series of shell companies he had registered weeks prior. He moved funds in small, incremental amounts, fractions of revenue that went unnoticed in the daily surge of millions. Every time he clicked a key, a portion of the company's future was siphoned into his own hidden accounts. He maintained his composed facade, offering suggestions to Robert about fleet maintenance costs, all while finalizing the transfer of the last liquid reserves. The siblings were too focused on the horizon to notice the foundation being hollowed out beneath them. Julian watched them work, his eyes scanning the monitors, waiting for the final ledger to clear his path. The Tuesday morning air felt heavy. Julian walked out of his office, not to his usual desk, but directly toward the boardroom. He did not look at anyone. He simply nodded toward the double doors, beckoning George and the three siblings to follow. The sound of their heels on the polished floor was the only noise in the building. Inside, Julian moved to the head of the mahogany table, a space he had never occupied before. He pulled a thick bound folder from under his arm and let it drop onto the center of the table. The thud echoed against the walls. He leaned forward, his palms flat on the surface, and smirked. It was a sharp, jagged expression that stripped away the last remnants of his professional facade. He tapped a finger against the top page, his gaze locking onto George. He declared that the emergency funding contract signed under their previous authorization had triggered an immediate transfer of equity. According to his calculations, he now held the majority stake. He was no longer an advisor. He was the owner. George stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the back of his chair. Leslie, Robert, and Angela stared at the document, the silence in the room turning absolute and suffocating. George moved to the table, his eyes scanning the lines of text. He picked up the contract, the paper stiff and cold under his fingers. He traced the ink of the signatures, his thumb brushing over the loops of his own name. He did not look up. He said, "This is not my hand. These signatures are forgeries." The room tightened. Leslie stepped closer, her breath shallow, watching her father's face. George slammed the document back down, his voice rising. "You fabricated these documents to steal this firm." Julian did not blink. He leaned back in the leather chair, crossed his arms, and let out a short, hollow laugh that grated against the silence. "Prove it," he replied, his tone devoid of any pretense of family loyalty. He tapped his watch, indicating the time. "The legal filings are already stamped. The board has been notified. You are not owners anymore. You are guests." Robert lunged toward the table, but George caught his arm, pulling him back. The weight of the situation landed on them with crushing force. Every legal protection they had built was being dismantled by a pen, and Julian's smirk remained fixed, an impenetrable wall between them and their life's work. Julian did not wait for them to process the threat. He reached for his phone, tapped a single command, and the boardroom screens flickered to black. Outside in the hallway, the hum of the servers ceased. Leslie tried her keycard on the door, but the reader flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. She tried again, pressing her thumb against the sensor, but the system registered her as an unauthorized user. Within minutes, the building security arrived. They were cold, professional, and moved with a precision that left no room for negotiation. Robert stepped toward the guard, but the man held up a hand, blocking the path. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the family was outside on the pavement. The glass doors clicked shut, locking from the inside. The office lights dimmed across the entire floor, one section at a time, until the building stood dark against the violet sky. George stared at his reflection in the glass, his face obscured by the fading light. They stood there for a long moment, the city noise swirling around them, but the silence between them was heavier. The keys in their pockets were now useless metal. The legacy they had nurtured for decades had been severed by a few lines of code, leaving them with nothing but the cooling air and the concrete beneath their feet. The drive back to the house was silent. George took the lead, his grip tight on the wheel as he turned into the driveway of the original family home. They walked past the house to the detached garage at the rear. The air inside smelled of stale oil. damp cardboard, and decades of accumulated dust. Robert pushed the heavy sliding door open, the metal rollers shrieking in the night. Moonlight filtered through grime-streaked windows, illuminating the remnants of their beginnings, a rusted chassis, stacks of old tires, and a workbench layered in thick grime. Leslie stepped over a pile of scrap metal, her boots crunching on loose gravel. She looked at the bare light bulb hanging from the rafters and pulled the cord. A flicker of yellow light revealed the cramped, shadowed space. This was not the glass-walled office they had lost, but it was theirs. Angela moved to the back corner, clearing a space on the workbench by sweeping away rusted tools and debris. She cleared enough room for a laptop. They were back where they had started, surrounded by the physical evidence of their first climb. The transition was absolute. The luxury of the corporate world was gone, replaced by the grit of the garage. They stood in the center of the floor, the cold night air pressing in, and began to reclaim their future from the dirt. The work started before dawn. Robert crawled under the rusted delivery truck, his face smeared with grease, his arms aching from the tension of the wrench. He tightened the fuel line, the metal cold and unyielding against his skin. A flashlight, propped between two wooden crates, cast long, jagged shadows that danced over the engine block. The truck sputtered, coughed, and finally groaned into life. Outside the garage, Leslie paced the narrow gravel path. She held her phone to her ear, her voice tight but unwavering. She navigated the fallout of cancelled contracts, listening to the sharp, impatient tone of a long-time partner. She did not plead. She explained the delay, promised the delivery, and hung up only when the client agreed to wait one more day. She leaned against the garage wall, exhaling slowly, before stepping back inside to check the inventory list. Every delivery required a manual check of the manifest. Every engine required a physical repair. They were trading sleep for survival, counting every hour as a battle won against the odds. Robert emerged from beneath the truck, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes fixed on the next task on the list. The garage was cramped, humid, and filled with the scent of fuel, but the rhythm of their labor was steady. They were operating on sheer willpower, turning the rusted remnants of their past into the only engine they had left to pull them forward. Angela claimed the corner workbench. 4 monitors hummed in the dark, casting a stark blue light across her face. She pushed aside a stack of dusty manuals, cleared the surface, and plugged in her drives. The garage air felt heavy, thick with the smell of engine oil and stale coffee. Her fingers tapped against the keys, a frantic, rhythmic clicking that filled the small space. She opened the first firewall, watching the data streams cascade in rows of green code. It was a labyrinth of encrypted tunnels designed to hide the movement of funds. She leaned in closer, the glare from the screens causing her eyes to ache. She ignored the fatigue, ignored the sound of Robert's wrenching outside, and focused on the digital ghost. A sudden spike in server load threatened to lock her out. She paused, her breath hitching, then adjusted the bypass protocols with a series of rapid keystrokes. The progress bar stuttered, crawled forward, and held. She was deep inside the company's former architecture now, navigating the hidden routes Julian had built to siphon their life's work. She did not blink. She did not move. She sat motionless, save for her hands, hunting for the one piece of evidence that would bring the entire facade crashing down. The hunt had become an obsession. The fourth night stretched into the small hours. Angela pushed her chair back, the metal legs scraping harshly against the concrete floor. Her eyes burned, but she kept them locked on the central display. She was digging through the back-end logs, tracing the ghost signatures that had gutted their company. A sequence of corrupted packets blocked her path. She gritted her teeth and initiated a brute force decryption script. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Her pulse hammered against her throat. She had one chance to bypass the secondary handshake, or the system would purge the logs entirely. She typed with surgical precision, recalibrating the handshake protocol and feeding it back into the terminal. The status bar turned from amber to green. Data began to cascade, filling the monitors with raw, uncensored transaction logs. She scrolled through thousands of entries, her breath hitching as the pattern emerged. There it was, the digital thumbprint. She tracked the flow of assets through a series of obfuscated nodes until they landed in a single verified destination, Julian's private crypto wallet. The connection was undeniable. She leaned back, the blue light of the screens reflecting in her wide, unblinking eyes. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a trap snapping shut. Angela did not stop at the wallet address. She initiated a deep cloud sync, reaching into the company's remote storage to pull the original, uncorrupted files. Her cursor danced across the interface, selecting hidden metadata and time-stamped logs that Julian had failed to scrub. A progress window popped up, warning of a security trigger, a silent alarm programmed to wipe the server if accessed without authorization. She held her breath, her hand hovering over the kill switch, then bypassed the encryption with a single decisive keystroke. The download speed surged. Files began to populate her local drive in rapid succession. Bank transfers, forged signatures, and the original, untainted merger contracts. She organized the data into a chronological sequence, a digital map that traced every illegal transaction back to Julian's personal terminal. Each document clicked into place, forming an airtight narrative of systemic theft. She checked the timestamps against the company's internal logs, confirming the exact moments he had manipulated the accounts. The screen displayed a complete, undeniable record of his deception. She highlighted the final directory, hit save, and watched the status bar reach 100%. The evidence was secured. The trap was set. Justice was no longer a hope. It was a matter of printing the pages. The printers hummed until the final page dropped into the tray. Leslie collected the stack, her movements steady as she slotted the documents into a heavy, reinforced binder. Robert stood by the door, checking his watch, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. They walked out into the cool morning air, the binder a physical weight against Leslie's chest. They reached the federal building 10 minutes before the doors opened. The lobby was vast, echoing with the sound of distant footsteps and the rhythmic clicking of security turnstiles. They waited in the queue, surrounded by the smell of floor wax and stale coffee. When their turn came, they stood before the intake desk. Leslie placed the binder on the counter. The clerk looked up, then down at the thickness of the evidence. She signaled for a senior investigator. The man appeared from an inner office, his eyes scanning the first page of the summary. He flipped through the forged signatures, the bank logs, and the metadata printouts. The silence in the room stretched thin, every tick of the wall clock sounding like a hammer blow. He closed the binder, nodded once, and gestured toward the secure wing. The shift had begun. Their evidence was now the law's weapon. The federal team moved with synchronized precision. They fanned out across the lobby, bypassing the front desk and heading straight for the executive suite. Inside, Julian was leaning over his desk, pushing a stack of ledger sheets into a shredder. He did not hear the door swing open. The lead agent stepped into his line of sight, hand hovering near his belt. Julian looked up, his face losing all color as the reality of the situation hit him. He scrambled back, knocking his chair into the glass partition with a sharp, echoing crack. The office door was already blocked. Other agents moved past him, sweeping the room, gathering hardware and original contracts from the mahogany shelves. The air in the suite grew heavy with the sound of rapid, authoritative commands. Julian tried to reach for his phone, but an agent stepped forward, blocking his path, and gestured toward the center of the room. The bustling city view outside the window remained indifferent to the sudden collapse of his influence. Every corner of the office was now under state control. The shredder sat silent, its work interrupted, as the agents methodically dismantled the infrastructure of his fraud. The reign he had built on deceit was dissolving in seconds. Julian tried to stand his ground, a frantic gesture toward the desk, but the agents were faster. They caught him by the shoulders, steering him firmly away from the mahogany workspace. He hit the wall with a dull thud, his breath escaping in a sharp, ragged gasp. He opened his mouth to protest, his eyes darting toward the door as if a phantom exit might appear. An agent stepped into his personal space, pressing a forearm against his chest to ensure he stayed pinned. The office went quiet, save for the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the men in the room. Julian's hands were pulled behind his back with practiced, mechanical efficiency. The metal bit into his wrists, the harsh, metallic click echoing off the marble floor like a gavel strike. It was a final, cold sound that signaled the end of his influence. He sagged against the wall, his head dropping as the reality of his situation took hold. The agents did not speak. They did not need to. They pulled him upright, his gait forced and uneven as they led him toward the exit. The view of the city remained, but the office was no longer his to command. His short-lived reign was over. The courtroom air felt thin and sterile. Julian sat at the defense table, his focus fixed on the polished wood surface as the judge delivered the final verdict. 12 years. The gavel strike was sharp, echoing the finality of the handcuffs from weeks before. As the sentence was read, the prosecutor moved to the second phase, the total seizure of all assets linked to the shell companies. Julian looked up, his expression hardening as he realized his private holdings were already being liquidated. Every account he had funneled money into was now frozen under state order. The judge signed the final decree, formally transferring the recovered funds back to the rightful entity. In the back row, Leslie, Robert, and Angela exchanged a silent nod. Their parents watched from the gallery, hands clasped tightly. The legal weight that had nearly crushed them was officially lifted. The court records were updated, and the digital freeze on their company servers was finally rescinded. By the time the courtroom doors swung open, the process of total reclamation was already in motion. The financial recovery was not just a legal victory, it was the start of their return to independence. They left the building into the afternoon light, the heavy uncertainty of the past months replaced by the immediate task of rebuilding. The sun hung high over the new terminal, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. A massive crowd filled the plaza, their voices rising in a steady, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the ground. Leslie, Robert, and Angela stood at the center of the stage, the morning heat radiating off the polished steel of the new facility. They held the handles of the giant shears, the blades catching the light as they aligned them with the center of the ribbon. The chatter of the crowd dipped, then surged into a roar of expectation. George and Mila watched from the front row, their presence a silent anchor against the backdrop of the cheering guests. Leslie gripped the handles, feeling the tension in the fabric. She looked at her siblings, a brief, silent acknowledgement of the months spent in the dark. Together, they squeezed the handles. The blades slid through the ribbon with a clean, satisfying resistance. As the two halves of the crimson fabric fell away, the crowd erupted. The sound was deafening, a wave of energy that surged across the entire complex. This was the moment of reclamation. The gates to the terminal swung open, and the first fleet of delivery trucks began to hum to life. The era of uncertainty had ended. The cheering gradually receded, leaving behind the steady, rhythmic pulse of the new terminal's loading bays. Engines purred in the distance, a sound that carried the weight of 25 years of labor. George turned away from the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the expansive layout of the facility. He looked at the logistics systems Angela had designed, the fleet Robert had maintained, and the client reports Leslie had stabilized. He remembered the cramped, dimly lit garage where this had all begun with a single rusted truck. The contrast was stark, yet the foundation remained identical to those early days. Fairness, sustainable practice, and the slow, disciplined climb toward success. He walked toward his daughter, Leslie, who was watching the loading platforms with quiet focus. The chaos of the past year, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, and the digital war had not eroded their core. It had forged it. George placed his hand firmly on her shoulder, a gesture that needed no words. They stood together, watching the trucks pull out into the afternoon light. Success was not found in the signatures on a contract or the resolution of a court case. It was found in the daily, grinding commitment to the work. The legacy was secure, held firmly by the hands that had refused to let it fall.